bit lets you know exact repetitions for their PAP training and their power training.
Okay. So I'm just going to take a step back for a second. So you've got a baseball player. Let's say you got a baseball player and it's the summertime, and he's not playing summer ball. He's got a fall season to get ready for. Say it's after the virus right now. You've got a kid that's probably lost some volume, probably lost some power, and he's probably lost some strength, and he's trying to get ready for a fall, and he's got to be ready for the spring as well. How are you going to prioritize strength versus power, and also versus volume to get this kid prepared?
Great question. First off, you have to identify your time frame, and let's just make up a number. We'll call it 8 weeks. That's a long time. You can do a lot in 8 weeks. Your assessment tools that you use are key. Now, remember when I talked about how everything's based upon my graduate school programming, and everything's based on relative strength?
Absolutely.
So I don't believe in 1 rep maxes just because, and I neglected to say this earlier, the first and foremost job of a strength coach, above all, is injury prevention. That has to be your goal going in, because if they're not in the field, they're not getting looked at, they're not getting their schools to look at them, they're not going pro, etc. So I don't believe in 1 RMs. You can get within 5 pounds or about 5% with a 3 RM. And I don't even let them do a true 3 RM. I know that they'll have 1 or 2 left in the tank, and I'll even base it off of 5. Because at the end of the day, your percentages may be off 5 pounds. Come on. But it's more important for them to hit every rep than it is for them to fail at reps. So to answer your question, your assessment tools are huge. I'd go run them through an assessment, and I would do the big lifts, whatever it may be, bench, squat, deadlift. And I know for a pitcher, clearly you're not going to bench him heavy, not even that close to season. So you would make your adjustments to a higher rep range to keep him safe. But identifying where he is today is going to be your most powerful tool. So your relative strength. Let's say, and I wrote my thesis on squatting, in reference to squatting, I can't even speak today. I got kids running upstairs, just knocking my thought processes. But I did my thesis on ground reaction forces and impact forces of shoulder tackling in backline rugby union athletes. So everything was based off of 1 RM. So what I do is, or not a 1 RM, but their rep max. So what I would do is establish where they are today relative to those king numbers that I mentioned earlier. That 1.9, 1.4 is ideal for bench press, and now that is very, very, very relative, because really you only need that in essentially offensive lineman pass blocking situations. There's a whole tangent I can go off on that for overhead athletes. So I base everything off that. So let's say 1.9 is perfect. Last season they're at a 2.0 and life is good. They become, because of COVID, detrained or in a detrained state, and they've dropped down to a 1.2. I don't know if that would happen, but let's say that way I can identify that their biggest, but let's say, before I go too crazy, his velo is still high and he's only lost a couple miles an hour on his pitches, right? The emphasis to get them back to where they were before their quote unquote detrained state would be strength, because he's lost so much. And remember, power's built on the foundation of strength. So in that situation, I would be able to identify that his biggest need was to put strength back on. I'd highlight, as much as I could in his programming for the shortest amount of time to get as much strength as I could. But you're doing them such a grave disservice if you limit their power development, because remember, if you can shoulder press 120s in each hand, but you can only throw 80 miles an hour, clearly you see where the emphasis needs to be. Remember, power training is training the nervous system, and skill acquisition becomes on the technique side. So their emphasis in this situation, or in that 120-pound dumbbell example, would be technique and power. In the one where he has lost so much strength, I would then identify that he needs strength, put him into a strength program, and then get him into power for at least 4 weeks. It's not going to make the biggest demand, but remember the ballistic nature that sports have. You're not in a single sagittal plane standing still ever, unless you're waiting. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So the idea of power training is twofold: getting them awesome and more explosive, but you're also prepping the tissues for the ballistic nature that sports has on it. So at the end of the day, I will, and this would be a case by case thing, but you have to prep them, because if their tissues are so stiff from all your strength work, and then they go try to throw 90, clearly they're going to blow their shoulder up, UCL goes, Tommy Johns, etc. But by prepping them, they may not be at ideal situation. They might not be the best they've ever been, but you know what? You kept them on the field where they can work on their skills and techniques. So you've done, So you've done your job as a strength coach, keeping them from injuring themselves and giving them the best that you can as a strength coach. You can't, I always tell athletes, parents, whoever I'm talking to, I'm not a magic maker, but I will do everything in my power under the realm of research to give your child or your athlete, and this is speaking to coaches too, everything I can. But I can't make an 80-mile-an-hour right-handed pitcher throw 97 in 8 weeks. Yeah. That's impossible.
Yep.
But, I mean, that hopefully that answers that question. That's the approach I would take.
Yeah, definitely. Right now, I'm obviously in that situation, and I lost some body weight too, some size. So I'm trying to, on my low intensity days, try to get some low weight work in with some high volume, just to get some kind of mass back.
Right.
And the method that I've been using on my central nervous system days has been strength. So I've been working to get my strength back, which is actually coming back to me quicker than I expected.
Mm-hmm.
I guess because your nervous system does have some kind of memory of what it's capable of. At least in my experience, I feel like when I've taken a break and I come back, I obviously don't want to jump into 90% effort, 85% effort right away. But over the couple of weeks, I've been doing kind of like a modified 5-3-1 method.
Jim Windler, not bad.
Yeah. And I'm back up to almost 85-90% of my max. So that's good. And then I'm going to regress and then hit it again and see where it takes me. But that's the safest thing for me right now, I think.
Yeah, and again, are you going to be playing? They just brought the MLB season back, and they're talking about bringing back travel ball for at least youth athletes. Are you going to play any summer ball or travel fall ball or anything like that?
To be quite honest with you, I'm going to play summer ball because I'm here from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
It's tough, man.
Monday through Friday, so it's pretty busy. But yeah, we'll see. At this point, I'm preparing for fall ball.
Okay. So you just have to sit down and use your own assessment tools to find out where you're at today. It doesn't matter where you were before anything happened. You have to identify today, Wednesday the 24th, where am I, Joe Padula, at? What are my needs and what takes the most emphasis of that need and what can I accentuate as quickly as I can? I don't mean rushing things, but getting the most bang for your buck. 5-3-1 is great, man, but that at five reps, you're pushing like the realms if you can hit reps at 85%, and that's for multiple sets. You know what I mean? So, and how often do you need to be hitting singles? I'm not knocking you. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Not often.
Right. So, remember, baseball, specifically pitching. Here's a great baseball example for you, something I fall back on. So how often do you see a guy swinging a bat with a donut on it or a weight implement or two bats or whatever it may be?
Every single game.
Every day, everywhere you go. It's the American way, right? I'll ask you a question, answer it honestly, just your thoughts. Do you think that swinging that implement, a weighted implement, increases bat velocity, swing velocity?
No.
It doesn't. Research shows us that by swinging a weighted implement, it only makes you good at swinging a weighted implement. And this is because the technique factor is so high. The same thing goes for heavy resisted sprinting. I'm not knocking resisted sprinting. I'm a big fan. But too much alters your form so much that you actually only get good at running against an implement or with an implement. So I'm not knocking sprint resisted or assisted sprinting or whatever because I'm all about it. But too much gives you a point of diminishing return. So I tell you that to just think just ask yourself the same question. Where are you at today? What are my needs? And from those needs, you can identify, and how much time do you have? Time is a big factor. Yes. How much time do you have? Are you going to be doing 2-a-days? Do you need to? How far apart should my 2-a-days be? Research again shows us that if you're going to be working multiple energy systems within the same day, you need at least 5 hours of rest between training sessions. So if I'm going to go do my cardio, let's say I'm going running distance, I need to wait 5 hours before I go do my strength work so that my body can optimally adapt to both stimuli. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So understanding, knowledge is power, man. Understanding is half the game. Then organizing is the other half. Everything else is a map. Like CSCS always has And I'm not knocking it. I'm a fan. It's the foundation of everything I learned, and I've had it for 10 years now. So like, it gives you a map of reps, sets, protocol, right? That's the easy part. Picking reps, sets, and exercises is the easiest thing you can do, man. Understanding the background, identifying the need, and then optimally training your body to get the most bang for your buck is the name of the game. And always, always, always pushing towards power. That not like for the day, but let's say you're in strength right now, knowing that the end game is laying down the foundation of strength. I always say it literally. You're building the house. You can't build a strong house without a strong foundation, right? But your strength work is building the house, and then turning on the lights is your power. Can't live in a house without lights, you know.
Absolutely.
You can, but it would suck.
So say after an off season, a kid is near peak strength.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be at that point that you start to throw in power, like prior to say March or February in a baseball season? How long would you plan ahead to work power off of the strength that's been developed?
Here's what I've learned just out of experience. Like, I'm a very organized person. I need structure so that I can execute. Now, I say that, but I go into it knowing that that structure is borderline organic, because microcycle variation in training session variation happens. Like I told you, a lot of things that you learn don't give you a real world view of what's going on in the individual's life. They might have just broke up with their girlfriend or boyfriend. They might have just failed a test. They might be starving. They might have an eating disorder. You know what I mean? There's so many variables that's going to affect your work. You're going to have to make variations. So if your kid is at peak strength going into February, you know, and the season starts very, very soon, right? So let's take a high school athlete, for example. His tryouts are mid-February. You know, he's playing his first game by the beginning of March. You should have been in power. I like to give myself 8 weeks. I can adjust as needed. You should have been in power at the end of December to set them up so that they can peak for their either tryout or their first game. So end of December, beginning January, they're gone for school, and as we know. So in another example, let's say they're not playing fall ball, right? It is now August or September, right? They're done with summer ball, travel's over, no fall ball, prepping for the next season. You have 6 months. Now, do you separate it up 3 months of strength work, whether it be, you know, anything hypertrophy, max strength, speed strength, as the funneling goes to power, right? 3 months, an easy way to say 3 months of strength, 3 months of power, boom, done. But what would I tell you, or what would you say if I told you that you can take a stair-step approach and hit that would be a mesocycle at 6 months, in mesocycle mini power sessions. Remember I told you can't do both, but now you've ballistically trained them. Their tissues have adapted over time. So what happens if you divvy those months up? You have 6 months, man, that's an eternity. You have forever to do this. This doesn't happen often. But what if you did 8 weeks of strength, skip over hypertrophy, go straight, and this is identifying, let's say that's what he needs. I'll even make it even, I'll go to another overhead athlete, very similar seasons. Let's look at a lacrosse player, right? Lacrosse players don't need, depending on position, right? If you're you know, you're a midi, you're gonna need to be able to have, you know, your conditioning up and be strong. But if you're a defenseman, like, you've got to be a diesel stack. You know what I mean? So let's say you have a lacrosse player. What if you go 8 weeks in strength, and because he's a lacrosse player, you know he needs conditioning, and you do something like some sort of muscle endurance training. I wouldn't even go over, let's break it down to 6 weeks. You go German volume training for 6 weeks. 60%, 10 by 10s for 6 weeks with 60 seconds rest. Boom, German volume training. So you do that, and now they're so freakishly conditioned, they've lost their power, or they're so freakishly strong. I break up that 6 months to the max amount that I could to get maximal adaptation. And this is where you can be as tedious as you want. 8 weeks of strength, 4 weeks of power. Now you've only gone 12 weeks, right? We've still got another at least 12 to go. And you can mimic that and do anything you want. That's the cool part about understanding, is you can manipulate variables, not just reps, sets, and exercises, man. Get the overall theme and do your best to help that athlete as an individual based on the demands of their sport. I don't really believe in the word sport specificity. Now, take that lightly, is I think it's a foo-foo term that people use to make it so, you know, a pitcher never bench presses. Why? Because he's a thrower. I don't believe in that.